All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our population-focused learning series on unconscious bias. This is our third series for 2020. My name is Isaac Baez, and I am the Engagement and Inclusion Coordinator, which is part of the System of Care Cultural and Linguistic Competency. We are very excited to have you all here for the special event through Zoom. We have a great presentation coming up, as well as a panel discussion on unconscious bias. We are currently recording this session and will be posting it on our StarkMHAR YouTube channel. The Inclusion Toolkit still has all the previous training sessions on our main website. This will be our last population-focused learning series for 2020. In your email, you should have received an agenda, a list of the keynote speaker, as well as the panelists, and a survey. During our training session, we ask that you make sure your mic is muted at this moment. Please feel free to write your questions in the chat box. We will be making note of the questions and will be asking them at the end of the presentation and during the panel discussion. Any questions that have not been answered during the training session will be replied by the panel in an email. All this information, as well as the presentation, will also be included in our toolkit on our website. This training session will help bring a better understanding and awareness about unconscious bias. We hope that this information will help you in your professional growth, and let me introduce the speaker. Olivia Montgomery, Training and Technical Assistant Coordinator for Equity and Inclusion at the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Olivia works to initiate an intersectional perspective in addressing violence in Ohio. Olivia formerly worked with underserved population at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network and within legal, campus, and community advocacy at a local program in Clark County. She is a community organizer and a civil rights activist, working with numerous human rights groups, including LGBTQI civil rights organizations and the NAACP. Olivia holds a bachelor's degree in sociology with a focus in African American studies from Ohio University. All right, let's pass it on to Olivia right now, and I will hand it to her. All right, go ahead, Olivia.
Thanks, Isaac. Good morning, everyone. This is so cool to see everyone's faces. I usually don't have so many people already on, so this is great. I'm going to go ahead. Well, first, I will start by saying if you do have questions in between, totally feel free to put it in the chat. Isaac's going to be watching it. You don't have to keep questions for the end. And depending on time, we might open it up so that you can unmute yourself, because I just love talking to people. And I think that would be really cool if we have the time. So I'm going to get my PowerPoint up and we will get started. And thanks, Isaac, for reading my bio. That's always so awkward. Can you all see my PowerPoint? Isaac, is it?
Yeah, we see the intro. If you want to make it bigger.
There we go.
There, yeah. There
Okay, great. So, like Isaac said, my name is Olivia Montgomery. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the founder of Live Woke, an equity consulting firm. I'm also the coordinator for equity and inclusion at the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. So we are the statewide coalition to end sexual violence in Ohio. We don't do direct services, but we do policy and macro level work to increase equity and access for survivors. Give me 1 second. Okay, great. I also am the chair for the AOC, the Statewide Anti-Oppression Committee, who advocates for leaders and people of color in anti-violence work through actively addressing individual and institutional oppression. So the AOC is convened by over 20 diverse social justice and anti-violence professionals, including the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Attorney General's office. So I always want to put a plug that if you are wanting to get further into anti-oppression work, we have different committees that are actively working, and we would love to have you also just reach out. I also just graduated as a 2020 National Fellow from a fellowship that was a culmination between CalCASA, which is the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and the National Women of Color Network. And before that, I came over from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. So I am kind of unique in that I've served in both statewide coalitions doing research with underserved populations. So if you have any questions about any of that, please definitely let me know. And this is Kane, who I've started putting into my presentations because he likes to pop up. He's my favorite coworker, and so you might see him too. So I wanted to let you know that he might be with us today too. So we'll get started with the context. Before introducing the concept of implicit bias, I think it's important to establish our starting place with a focus on human service response and investigation. So this is now widely recognized as a criminal justice function that requires specific skills, knowledge, and practices for everyone from law enforcement, prosecutors, healthcare providers, victim advocates, and allied professionals. Moreover, we know that from decades of social scientific research, reporting rates for violence for gender-based violence are among the lowest of all violent crimes, and at the same time, the attrition rates are high, and that pattern is called the justice gap. So the research shows that gender-based violence perpetrators are not typically held accountable within the American justice system, and that is held true in other countries as well. And we know that the justice gap and the health outcomes for people of color are definitely a cause of that is implicit bias. So I do want to always start with, before I get into, the training, that implicit bias is not the definite answer. So unconscious bias has been popular, for companies to rectify prejudice, such as, racism, sexism, all the isms. And with this new wave of collective consciousness, folks are turning to implicit bias training for their organizations with the thought that if we enable people to be aware of their biases, then they can work to eliminate them. We are working to, raise that awareness, but we know from the data that these disparities already exist. So there's not very much scientific evidence that implicit bias training actually shifts implicit bias. We know while these trainings are definitely necessary, relying on unconscious bias training as a one-off solution, it can frustrate underrepresented staff as it's different than actual structural change. So why it's not working is, why it's not necessarily working, is it's focusing on unconscious bias, and that distracts us from spending energy on explicit or conscious actions that are upholding systemic inequity. So oftentimes folks are already aware of the negative attitudes and behaviors that they yield. And without an incentive to change it, folks prefer to stay comfortable. So the way that we get there, and what I am planning on covering before the end of our time together, are actual tools that we can use to make a plan that will change the foundation of the way that we do our work. So we must focus on the actions that lead to people suffering via individuals and systems that perpetrate systemic racism. And I'll slow down because I get to talking. I just want to check and make sure nobody's asked. Okay, great. So yeah, we have to focus on the actions, and the real goal of investing in implicit bias training should be that policy and cultural shift for your organization. And like I said, I have 4 different tools that I will give you all at the end that are things that you can start doing, in your organizations today. Just relying to check a box that you've had implicit bias training isn't always the best. So I just want to say that all of the research that I'm sharing with you all today has been pulled from The Ohio State University's Kirwan Institute for Race and Ethnic Studies. They are leading the nation in implicit bias research. It's really cool because it's in our backyard. And then Dr. Sue from Columbia University has done a lot of research in the last 10 years, creating intersectional research around implicit bias. So everything that you will be hearing today comes from those 2 sources. And if you want to get deeper into that research, these are the places that I would suggest for you to go. So like I said, The Ohio State University, they are doing some really awesome research, and they have created some really cool videos. They're about anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes a piece. So we're going to start out from a video from them. And let's see, who can I see? Miss Sonia Wade, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear this in 1 second? You're who I can see.
This first lesson will provide the foundational understanding of how we define implicit bias and why it matters for our pursuit of diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. During this module, when we talk about implicit bias, we're referring to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Let's start to unpack that a little bit. Although it's often used in a negative context, the word bias simply means an evaluation or belief. That means it's possible to have a bias that is favorable or unfavorable. In other words, you can have a bias towards an object, person, or concept that is positive or negative. Bias in and of itself is a neutral term. For example, take these 3 colors. I could say that I am biased towards red or biased against blue, or maybe I'm neutral towards yellow, and all of those statements could be true. And most people would agree that my preferences for red over yellow or blue don't make me a bad person. They are simply my preferences, and I probably did nothing to consciously control these preferences myself. So when we say that our psychological processes are implicit or unconscious, we're simply referring to something operating outside of our conscious awareness. Like bias, the term implicit in and of itself isn't a good or bad thing. In fact, as you will learn later in this training, we rely on implicit processes to move efficiently throughout the world. So by definition, implicit bias is nothing more than our evaluations or beliefs, whether positive or negative, that can exist without us even realizing it. So if it's true that our biases may be hidden to us and they aren't necessarily bad, why are we talking about them? Well, we're talking about them because we now know that it's possible for us to form implicit evaluations based on inaccurate information or stereotypes of people, objects, and ideas. There's also evidence that implicit biases can impact our decisions, perceptions, and behaviors. This makes it more difficult for us to live up to our values of equity and fairness. That means that the actions and decisions resulting from our implicit biases can create real-world barriers to equity and opportunity. You'll learn more about what the research says about the effects of bias later on in these modules. But these practical applications are why it's so important to learn about implicit bias, particularly those biases that don't align with your intentions or explicit beliefs. To summarize, implicit bias refers to attitudes or stereotypes we hold outside of our conscious awareness. Implicit bias does not refer to those beliefs we are aware of, but that we conceal or suppress in an effort to appear non-biased. The word attitude describes your evaluation of some concept like a person, place, thing, or idea. For instance, in the color example from earlier, I shared that I prefer red. Attitudes can be positive or negative. In this example, my evaluation of red is positive. Alternatively, my evaluation of blue is negative. We use the word stereotype to refer to those beliefs that are mentally associated with a given category. For example, people often stereotype Asians as being good at math, and men are associated with being in the workplace more often than women are. Even if we don't endorse these stereotypes, they can unintentionally influence our mental processes. At this point, you might be asking yourself, why is the topic of implicit bias worth our consideration when there are so many other issues that can impact our pursuit of equity and fairness? Implicit bias is just another tool we possess to understand how our conscious commitments to fairness and equity can be disrupted, even when people have the best intentions. More importantly, considering implicit bias doesn't take away from the importance of addressing explicit or direct instances of discrimination. In fact, the effects of implicit, explicit, and institutional bias are informed by and contribute to each other. Although the main focus of these modules will be on implicit bias, we will also incorporate information and resources related to institutional and overt forms of bias. In the next modules, we will dive deeper into how implicit bias can show up in our daily life and how we can work to counter it. Thank you for joining us.
So every time I watch that video, I'm like, oh, yes, 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 yes. So I really think they do a really great job. And we'll be watching 2 more short videos from them in this presentation because they make it very clear. So what is implicit bias? It's the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. It's important to focus and learn about implicit biases that don't align with your intentions or explicit beliefs. And in this realm, we are discussing, of course, like referring to the intentions and the mission of your organization. So you can have, a really awesome mission, but if you have unchecked implicit biases, it's not going to reflect totally on the people that you're serving. And implicit bias does not refer to those beliefs that we conceal or suppress in an effort to appear non-biased. So confusing the two, that's what makes these trainings ineffective. And like they said, they all kind of play into one another. So unchecked implicit bias can lead to that explicit bias and discrimination. Just checking the chat. So everyone thinks of changing the world, but do we think about changing ourselves? And we're going to get into the second video.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua Bates, and I am a social policy analyst at the Kirwan Institute. In the previous lesson, we defined implicit bias as those attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. But what does it mean to have thoughts and associations that you're unaware of? What does that look and feel like? And why does it even matter? Let's try bringing implicit bias to life by doing some quick exercises. As you'll soon see, these exercises are very simple. The purpose is not whether or not you can complete them, but what they show us about how our brains work. Let's start by playing a game of word association. Think or say aloud the word that should go in the blank. Night and, black and, young and. Obviously, there was nothing difficult about that exercise. Not only was it easy to fill in the blanks, you likely had a response ready long before you were prompted to fill it in. This is the power of our implicit cognition and our lightning-fast associations. When faced with incomplete information, we rely on associative memory to quickly fill in the gaps. It's also important to know that most people have the same response. It is possible to have similar associations shared across various groups of people. We usually refer to these as norms or stereotypes. For the next activity, please read aloud the following paragraph. This was a horribly misspelled paragraph, yet you were able to read it without much difficulty at all. Even if it took you a little longer to read, your unconscious cognition automatically made sense of the paragraph based on your ability to associate it with words you already know. Let's look at another example. Most of us see ABC. Similarly, here we see 12, 13, and 14. Even though the middle figure in those images never changed, our brains are able to form different perceptions of the same image based only on the context surrounding, and this is done without our intention or control. What these three exercises demonstrate is the automatic, adaptive, and associative nature of our implicit processing. When faced with otherwise ambiguous or confusing content, our brains try to quickly make sense of it by relying on associations we've stored in our memory. Importantly, these stored associations don't have to be based on accurate and logical information. By just seeing concepts grouped together repeatedly, we can internalize associations that are skewed, distorted, and inaccurate. Now, let's go through one final exercise that really speaks to the question of why implicit bias matters. On the screen, you will see a column of words. When prompted, please say aloud the color of each word, not what the word says. Try not to read the words, just say what color it is. Ready? Here we go. Great. Let's try it again with a similar set of words. Remember, just say the color of the word. Don't read the word. Ready? Go. This assessment, known as the Stroop task, is a psychological task that looks at the dynamics of our automatic processing. For most folks, the first screen was simple. The color and the words themselves matched. Therefore, the results of your implicit inclination to read the words aligned with your explicit directions to say the color. On the other hand, your automatic inclination to read the words the second time may have taken a little bit longer. As this demonstrates, our implicit and explicit goals can and often do diverge. This is why implicit bias matters. While we like to think of ourselves as rational and logical adults, the reality is a lot of our thought processes are occurring unconsciously, without our intention and control. Those implicit processes, when activated, can derail even the most sincere explicit intentions. There are limits to the amount of information you can consciously process at any given time. In fact, research shows that on average, we can only consciously process between 5 and 9 stimuli at a time. So that phone number you misremembered was at the limit of your capacity to process information consciously. We rely on our implicit cognition to move through the world. Given this, uncovering your biases and understanding their effects on your life and others is critical to ensuring that intentions and outcomes align. In the next lesson, we're going to dive more deeply into the origin of our biases, how they form, and where they come from.
So I will open up the chat, and I'm curious to know, what are some of the stereotypes that you're seeing when you're trying to advocate for the people that you're serving? Kind of those like Black and young and, like, what are the things that you're seeing folks, the folks that you're trying to use, like serve, like what are some of the stereotypes that you're facing and having to advocate for when you're serving those people?
For me, it's more like in the Latino community, they thinking that everyone is from Mexico, and no, everyone came from Mexico. We have different countries, and usually this is the stereotype that everyone has. If you are from Mexico, just come back to your country, or just come back to Mexico. And a lot of them, they are from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, or we have community from Puerto Rico, and they belong to the United States.
Jana. Someone put in the chat, microaggressions from colleagues regarding socioeconomic status and upbringing, naturally thinking all Black clients are from the hood. Thank you. I've experienced staff at the institution believing all youth are bad and don't deserve to be treated with respect. Thanks, Carla.
I also have the situation with my population of a juvenile justice that my youth themselves buy into the stereotypes. So you're not just dealing with the people in power, but also the youth who feel like, you know, this is their identity.
Because they've been assigned a label probably very early, and maybe not even directly, but indirectly from the thousands of messages that we're receiving a day. Thank you. So we have some more in the comments. I work with juvenile sex offenders. Another one says, believing any youth who has baggy pants is a punk kid. Clients without a job are just lazy. Believing fat people are unhealthy, lazy, and their size is always the root of any health issue. Counseling is only for rich white people. Most people, sorry, it's my dog and the mailman. Most people residing in shelter are thieves. Clients with mental illness, especially schizophrenia, are incompetent. Assuming gender based on presentation or performance of gender traits. Thank you for that. Labeling those that are in our facilities by their criminal background, such as they will always be a felon. Believing young people are not experienced enough to have valid viewpoints on important issues. Thank you. Thank you for that one, because I think the young folks are the ones that are actually going to save all of us. Like, give it to them. So yeah, thanks. So all of these messages that we are, you know, battling not only with the community when we're trying to advocate for people, but with our colleagues too, trying to break these down. And so thank you all for sharing. If you have more, women advocating for their kids or themselves are demanding, or yes, absolutely. And I have a PDF that I will pass out. I had a video, but we're not going to show that today. So I have a PDF that goes over different microaggressions and different stereotypes. It's by Dr. Sue, and it's a really awesome tool in, you know, if you need to advocate for people, being able to point to this specific thing and just being able to break it down for people. Sorry, we have another one. When I started teaching at a private university, I just assumed that everyone who was going there had some money, when actually there is a significant portion who are from low socioeconomic status. Thank you. Believing that there isn't stability for children in single parent homes. Thanks. So a lot of gender-based stereotypes we're facing, a lot of age-based stereotypes that we're facing. And I think it's important to remember that we are working under a patriarchal society. So even if we're working within, you know, even if we're doing our best within systems, we're still working in systems, and there is a limit of what we can do. But keeping that in mind and having grace for yourself is important. And I think it's just super important to really do some self-reflection around implicit biases, because like I said, no matter how great your mission is written out, if you are having, you know, people who haven't done that work in your organization, your mission's not going to get met. And we had one more: negative views towards those charged with felony criminal offenses and dealing with mental illness and substance abuse issues. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. So we'll get back into it. So implicit bias in action. Implicit biases, they are the product of those learned associations and social conditioning. They often begin at a young age, and most people are unaware that they hold them. Importantly, these biases do not necessarily align with personal identity, and it's possible to unconsciously associate positive or negative traits with one's own race, gender, or background. So, you know, when faced with incomplete information, so when we get to a place where we don't know, we automate back to what we do know, and that is going to be based on how we grew up. They're automatic, adaptive, and associative. And my favorite is that they don't have to be based on accurate or logical information, which is more the reason why we should be really getting into the base and the root of where we learn these messages, where are these messages coming from, where they're coming from, when we learn them, and if they have any validity to them or not. So I wanted to put this pause in here too, and I want everyone to just take a few seconds and think about, when was the last time I noticed a prejudice in myself? What is an environment that I find myself most comfortable in? Who else is there? Who are my closest 3 friends? What similarities do we have? And what was the last stereotype I witnessed but didn't speak out on? So just take a few minutes, just take, if there's a question that specifically speaks out to you, and just think about that. And then I'll ask maybe a few people to share if they're comfortable. So did anyone want to share on what they're thinking about?
Well, I'll just open it by saying it's difficult with these questions in the time of COVID and isolation.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I noticed a prejudice in myself, it's interesting times right now because of the news, and maybe you see something in your living room or whatever, where maybe like the kids here in Columbus, we had football, Friday night football, and the kids have the flags they ran across the field with, and they had the thin blue line, And we're so polarized now that the knee-jerk reaction might be you're anti-BLM if you see that flag. But if you dig a little deeper and try to look a little harder, that's a memorial is what that flag is. I'm not sure that everybody gets the nuance. And environment that I find myself most comfortable in, I really don't know. 3 closest friends. Similarities would be politics and religion. I can't sit down and, have arguments. Stereotype I witnessed but didn't speak out on. I don't know. Yeah. Some of them just I don't have an answer to. So, all right, somebody else.
Thank you.
I can give a quick example. Whoever wants to speak first. I can give a quick example, and this didn't happen to me, but I was just talking to someone who has an awareness about an implicit bias, and so they noticed it and caught on and said, wait a minute, like this is something that I didn't think I had a problem, and then all of a sudden with COVID, something switched. And so it had to do with African-American males wearing masks, because of that stereotype of being a thief, a robber, or that misconduct. And so I was walking through the supermarket, the visualization of seeing them with masks was like a bit of a turnoff, because as they were walking through, they kept seeing those individuals and thinking about that and kind of moving to the side a different way, staring at them a little bit more. And then that person had to like make a stop and say, wait a minute, why am I seeing them? Because I should be okay with them wearing a mask because they're trying to be protective, of the recommendations that we're told, specifically when you're out in public, to prevent COVID. That's an example of a situation that can happen.
Isaac. So we have some comments in the chat. One of my biases was against LGBT community. Being Black, I believed our struggle was worse because you can hide sexuality, but you can't hide race. I had to check that bias and sit with that. Thanks for sharing that. One of my best friends recently came out as non-binary, and I had to check myself that the first thing I thought of was, you're only doing this because you just moved to San Francisco and you want to fit in. Obviously that wasn't true, and a pretty gross knee-jerk reaction thought for me to have. Thanks, Alex, for your vulnerability. So I appreciate you all sharing. I will say that this is a very interesting time to be leading race conversations in the United States. There are a lot of different views, and they can be polarizing, but I don't think that they have to. I think what happens when we start having these conversations is folks are shamed into, their thoughts. And as we'll see a little bit later with some of my recommendations, having, an accountability partner can be a really powerful thing. So not surrounding yourself by people that look and talk and believe the exact same things that you do. We want to raise our EQ and our CQ, which is our emotional and our cultural intelligence. And the way that we do that is through constant self-reflection. So having these moments, sitting with those like, oh, I cannot believe that I, did that or said that or felt that, is actually really going to increase your emotional and cultural intelligence and make you just a way better advocate. Because we work with all different types of people with all different types of backgrounds. So if there's anyone else that maybe wanted to share, and if not, we can move on. Great, appreciate y'all for sharing. Oh, we have someone in the chat. The last stereotype that I witnessed was from my own family member. I tried to address it, but it was a difficult topic to broach with them. Definitely, yeah. I think that gauging that energy that you're going to put in is very important. But you had the awareness to be able to notice that it was a stereotype, and that's really important too. So a single story creates a stereotype, right? People live very intersectional lives. Oh, we have another comment. Prejudiced in myself, young people who wear white earbuds constantly or in public. Yeah, the Gen Zers, I'm like, I have no idea, but the more things go on, I'm like, oh, they know what they're doing. Like I actually had to have my roommate, explain to me that like, Gen Zers are so well versed in technology. They are, especially with everything being online now with COVID, they are the ones that we should be hiring and looking to make our organizations innovative. And I had that bias too. So constantly, checking myself and surrounding myself by people who are willing to check me is important too, in a loving way, right? So we have one more video from the Curwen Institute. I hope these are clear and that you guys are enjoying them, because I love the Curwen Institute.
Hi, I'm Lena Tenney, Coordinator of Public Engagement for the Race and Cognition program at the Curwen Institute. So far, we have talked a lot about what implicit bias is and how it operates. Now we will share some information about the origins of our biases. To do so, we will discuss different perspectives on how we internalize the messages in our environment as implicit associations or biases. Our brain's ability to make connection between two concepts is known as associative learning. The best example of how our minds do this is through the process of classical conditioning. Most of you may have seen or heard about the original classical conditioning study conducted with the scientist Pavlov and his dogs. Every time Pavlov gave his dogs food, they began to salivate. This was their automatic response. Then he rang a bell every time he presented the food to the animals. Over time, after seeing these two stimuli paired together repeatedly, the dogs eventually exhibited the physiological response of salivating when a bell was rung, even when there was no food around. The association was formed. Even though this classic study uses the examples of animal behavior, we all do the same thing when our brains try to perceive and categorize people. So in the same way that the dogs associated the bell with food, we associate characteristics such as leadership or criminality with aspects of people's identity, like gender or race. For example, because CEOs of large companies have historically been older white men, this may be the first image that comes into our mind when we think of someone in this role. One of the most interesting things about this style of learning is that people internalize associations at a young age, and it's our childhood experiences that ingrain them in our minds. So even if we hold beliefs that value equity and fair treatment, we can still be implicitly influenced by those messages we already received. I'm a perfect example of that. People who know me are always surprised to learn that I have a strong implicit association connecting women with being at home and men being in the workplace. In my life, this association is pretty ironic. Here I am, a genderqueer person in the workforce who believes very strongly that people of all genders should be able to pursue their dreams. And yet, I still hold this strong association that directly opposes my own values and self-interest. But I know this association didn't appear out of nowhere. My own family experience reflected this dynamic. My mother was an incredible stay-at-home mom who cared for 6 children, and my father served in the Air Force. I don't think I really knew any women who worked outside of the home, other than my teachers, until middle school. Because of this early experience, it's no surprise that I still unconsciously associate women with family and men with careers. But since I know about the implicit associations I hold, I can be mindful of my biases or inclinations and intentionally try to stop them. For example, if I am part of a hiring committee for a job, I need to be aware of the possibility that my implicit associations might cause me to more harshly evaluate candidates who are women, while giving the benefit of the doubt to candidates who are men. With this awareness, I am actually able to start behaving in ways to address my biases.
So I love that video, and that's why I wanted us to touch on our internalized, messages beforehand. Oh, sorry, I'm going to check the chat. Okay, so we have some more comments that I might save so that we can get through to our tools, but I see you all and I appreciate you. So in summary, implicit bias operates outside of our conscious awareness. It is unconscious, automatic, and relies on associations that we form over time. We can form biases towards people or towards a group of people based on what we see in the media and our background and experiences. And our biases often reflect how we internalize messages about our society rather than our intent. Nevertheless, we can still act on our biases in ways that can harm others. So I want to get into the impact of unchecked and unmonitored implicit biases. First with social hierarchies. So although we have implicit cognition, and although it isn't necessarily bad, right? Those are our peanut butter and jelly messages. When we use these processes to unconsciously identify and differentiate people in social categories, that's when it can cause a problem. Because then we assign people into categories, and that creates a social, hierarchy. Like we know, there is a dominant culture in the United States, and it is prioritized over minority culture in the makeup of our country. And research demonstrates the connection between implicit bias and attitudes, and then to discriminatory behavior. So kind of that's where we start, and eventually, if it goes unchecked, it will result in discriminatory behavior. So I like to give the example, like when I'm working with people in my field, you know, we see this with survivors and who makes the perfect survivor, right? Like who's easier to believe, what's your ideal case? Those are based on social hierarchies, implicit cognition, and implicit bias. Another impact are microaggressions. Racial microaggressions are the brief and everyday slights, insults, indignities, and denigration messages sent to people of color by well-intended people who are unaware of the hidden messages being communicated. And those impacts, they are going to ultimately be really bad for your organization. They're going to create hostile and invalidating climates for people of color, sap their spiritual and psychic energies, and their calmative nature can result in depression, frustration, anger, rage, loss of self-esteem, anxiety, etc. You know, you're going to have a high turnaround rate if people are not comfortable working at your organization with, you know, microaggressions being unchecked. And I think it's important, even though they're called microaggressions, they're not micro. They're rooted in stereotypes. They lead to imposter syndrome. They create those negative labels around our peers and clients. Someone was saying that a lot of youth are internalizing those labels and, you know, lack of motivation for peers and clients, and ultimately isolation. So implicit bias may oppose a person's adopted worldview, but because they're not consciously controlled, they may nonetheless be reflected in their behavior, including in the professional realm. So ultimately, implicit bias leads to discrimination against people who are not members of one's own identity group and can influence important decisions we make in our personal, professional, and social lives. It affects things like where we live, where we work, who our children's friends are, who our friends are, you know, which political candidate we vote for, what social programs we support, everything. For most Americans, all of these issues are influenced by racial attitudes, and implicit bias distorts these attitudes, and it limits the opportunity that each of us have to live a fully engaged life. And like I said, it doesn't matter how great your intentions are. If you aren't addressing systemic structural racism and gender-based bias within your workplace, you won't meet your mission's goals. So now I want to get into the tools that I have brought with me in my imaginary toolkit for addressing implicit bias. And they're based off of Dr. Sue's outline. So I've created activities around the 4 pillars of, well, I'll show you. How about I show you? So our tools for addressing implicit bias. The first thing that you can do when you want to address implicit bias is promote self-awareness. And this is an activity called testing implicit bias. It is based off of the Harvard Implicit Bias Instrument. So they have a ton of different categories that you can measure. So they have race, gender and science, age, I don't know them all, but a ton of them. And you can go through and gauge yourself. And you don't have to tell anyone what the outcome is, but I will tell you that when I took it, I was appalled at my answers. And so it really will teach you a lot. So the first pillar in addressing that implicit bias is promoting self-awareness. And this is a really awesome thing that you can do to do that. The second is understanding the root, understanding where these messages came from. So what I like to do is start with that Harvard test and then answer these 4 questions. So, you know, and you can take out race and gender and put in whatever identity you want. So just thinking about, where did you learn these messages of race growing up? Where did you learn these messages of gender growing up? And when did you learn that people were treated differently based on these certain things? So that will bring out a lot of responses around messages that we are learning as children, and not all of them are good. So that's a really cool activity that you can do with your staff as well. The third is promoting discussion, and I'm sorry, this is a lot of text. It's going to be a lot of text on this slide, so that's why I split it up into two. But promoting discussion, these are a lot of really awesome conversations that you can have among your staff. You can have it with that accountability partner, you know, that you have with your, you know, in your organization. You can take a case when it's done and have a conversation about, you know, around these different things. So that is also a really cool way to engage promoting discussion. And, you know, like I said, you don't always want to do it with someone who's like thinks and acts and looks just like you. As long as there's like respect, I think it's really cool to have diverse conversations with folks. And lastly, this is a really cool one, is that ultimate culture shift. So if you're to envision a workplace where these concepts no longer exist, and what I do is just put this on a Google Doc and just let everyone in your organization just anonymously like write it in. You can do that for all of these. So what needs to be taken down for that world to exist? What needs to be inspired for that world to exist? And what needs to be exalted, or what already exists that may just need to be, you know, utilized and celebrated. So this was adopted from a transformative justice activity by Anuj Bhandari, who has done a lot of work with OAESV. And yeah, so really awesome. And that's what we want to do, is lead to the ultimate culture shift within our organization. Policies and procedures and things that are going to be flexible and not prioritize dominant culture, but give, you know, space for the people in your organization to be able to show up as their full selves, with their full story as, you know, held as truth too. So I'm like right hitting time. So that's what I have for you all. And I appreciate you very much. I know that we kind of flew through those, but I will send those slides to the appropriate people to get them out to you, so that you have those activities that you can do with your organization if you think those would be helpful. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay, Isaac. Okay.
Sure, that's fine. And so we'll give a couple of minutes to open up to see if anybody wants to ask any direct questions. I'm more than welcome to unmute yourself and turn your cameras on if you like, to be able to ask a question. There were some other comments placed in the chat box too.
Yeah, and I can read those if you want me to,
Sure.
Isaac. Okay, so we have Gen Z are great at technology, but they often believe that those that are not have little to no value, right? So those are like the messages that they're receiving and the socialization that they're receiving, and I agree. I have a cousin who is really into colorism. She is quite fair-skinned and often says things like she's very dark-skinned, but she is pretty. And whoever wrote that is, oh, that's Miss Moore. We have a 301 discussion that we can get into around getting deeper into those messages and colorism, and absolutely. Thank you. My dad recently had a stroke, and he has become extra cranky and judgy about everyone, with, you know, parentheses, old, disabled, gay, etc. He will be like, oh, that person is just so weird because the person is in a wheelchair, but because he had a stroke, it's hard to even correct or say anything. He doesn't even have the capacity for much change. Is there anything I can say to stop it or not take it on? It drives me crazy. Thank you for that vulnerability. I appreciate that. So I will say, with, you know, that accountability partner and like having that whole section, the goal of that is to educate, not to shame. Because when we shame, we shut them down. And I have family members that are like that too. They already think that I'm like Malcolm X. Anytime I walk in the door, they do not want to have conversations with me. But, you know, just making sure that one, you have the capacity to provide that education, but, you know, educating with facts, that's the other thing I bring in my tool bag is just hard, cold facts. And I know that it can be frustrating. So maybe finding someone that will validate, you know, you, that you can have those conversations with and kind of debrief, because that's rough. That's rough. I appreciate you for sharing. I appreciate all of you for sharing. This is great.
So I guess we'll, so there's one more if you want to get to that one.
I think it's also important to realize that while we're learning more about ourselves and others to reduce our bias, we need to also stop the side of bias that tells us the specific movements speak for everyone within the subset. Absolutely. So recognizing that everyone has, you know, their own story. And if you're curious, making sure that you're asking the people that you're around, how do you feel about this? Because for an example, I get questioned like, is it Black or is it African American? And the answer is, you ask people, you know, what they prefer, and you mirror the identity that they are portraying to you, just like we do with survivors, just like we do with anyone that we use survivors in our field. I'm not sure the terminology, but the people that you're serving, ask their pronouns, and okay, and you know, just reflect that and respect that. So thank you. There was one slide that listed imposter syndrome, and I've never heard that term. Could you briefly explain what that is? Absolutely. So imposter syndrome essentially is believing that, you know, you've received so many messages that you don't belong to the dominant culture, that when you get into a space where you may be the only person of color, you may be the only woman, you may be the only X, Y, and Z, you believe that you don't belong there. So you feel like an imposter, and it affects your work output, and it leads to, there's a lot of research. I'm like thinking about things I could send you. There's a document called The Problem of Women of Color in the Workplace that does a really good job of describing imposter syndrome. But essentially, yeah, it's taking on all of those labels that you're not worthy and you don't belong, and then you get the job, and then you show up and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't do this. Oh, did I cut out? I'm so sorry.
I hear you fine.
Okay.
Is everybody here okay?
I like don't stop. If I get to going, I'm not stopping. I appreciate
I hear you fine.
Okay.
I hear you. Yeah.
Good to know you have family that goes here. Here we go. Oh yeah, thank you for the information. Yes, Ms. Gail. All the time. Thanksgiving is fun. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Thank you all so much. And if you have any follow-up questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, appreciate you.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to, the one thing that I will owe the group is a list of resources. So we'll put a list of resources for everyone to get sooner than later, and make sure that's also part of the toolkit as well. So we'll move on to the next part, and then and if you still have questions, please continue to write them in the chat box, and I'll start reading them out. And we'll be able to have some more conversation, including with our panelists as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating. I know that these are strange times with us doing everything through Zoom, but it actually makes it a lot more comfortable when we're able to see some faces and get to hear some voices. The only way we can add some personal touch is by doing it this way, so I really do appreciate it. Just again, thank you all for being here. So I'm going to move on and introduce our panelists. And so I'm going to start with Brandis. Brandis, if you would like to just say hi to everybody so they can see you on the camera.
I'm Brandis.
All right. So Brandis, they, them, is a queer, non-binary psychotherapist who lives and owns a private practice in North Canton, Ohio. Their clinical work is anti-oppressive informed, LGBTQ+ affirming, fat positive, and brings personal passions and pop culture into each session through geek therapy. They earned a BA in sociology from Mount Union College and their MSW from the University of Akron, Akron School of Social Work. Prior to starting a private practice, They spent several years in inpatient psychiatric social work with adults, particularly the geriatric population. Brandis serves on the board for Transcend, a local transgender support group, and serves as a board vice president for StarkMHAR as well. Outside of their work as a therapist, Brandis has been writing a novel every November since 2002 for National Novel Writing Month. They run an online community for anti-busy life tending, and their houseplant game is approaching indoor forest level during these pandemic times. Thank you, Brandis, for being here. We're going to move on with Christina. Christina, if you can say hi to everybody. You want to turn your mic on?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Awesome. So Christina Zenon Alvarez joined StarkMHAR in March 2019 as a cultural ally for the Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Maya communities. As a cultural ally, she is working with families through engagement and outreach by talking about any concerns they are facing and then connecting the communities to resources and services they need. She is also a member of the St. Anthony's All Saints Parish, where she helps on several activities, including translating the Sunday Mass to Spanish, youth group coordinator, member of Pastoral Council, and serving at multiple activities. Christina's passions are socializing and helping people. She has exemplified these passions through being open, easy to communicate with, building friendships, and volunteering her time to support others. In the United States, she has encountered her passion of helping the Latino, Latinx, and Maya community. Christina was born in Oaxaca, Mexico, and grew up in Mexico City. She moved to USA with her husband and 2 kids in 2001 and studied English, obtained a bachelor's degree in social work with a minor of sociology in Topeka, Kansas, and a master's degree in social work at the University of Akron. She has taken multiple training courses related to immigration, social justice, Catholic formation, and family development. Thank you, Christina, for being here. And so we have one more person. All right, Ms. Ramel Moore, would you be able to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
All right, give me 1 second. All right, so Ms. Ramel has worked at 3 institutions of higher education, including as Vice President of Students Affairs at Hood College in Maryland. She has as Executive Director of Fulbright International Binational Commission on Cultural Exchanges in Liberia and the National W.E.B. Du Bois Center for Pan-African Culture in Ghana. In Stark County, she's worked at county community-based organizations. While serving as Executive Director of Coming Together Stark County, she became a Certified Diversity Executive, which is awarded by the International Society of Diversity. Ramel is an independent consultant and has provided training and grant writing services to a number of local organizations. Ramel also speaks nationally and internationally. Presently, she is pursuing a doctorate in humanities and culture and is on track to complete in 2021 or early 2020. All right, thank you. So I am going to start with our panel discussion. And again, if for anyone, please feel free to write in the chat box and I'll be able to ask the questions as we go along. Remember, any questions that you have, just write them down. Nothing is simple. So just feel free to ask the questions as you feel comfortable. And so I'm going to start with Olivia, and I know Olivia has answered some of these questions at the end of her presentation, but I want her to solidify a little bit more of resources or even toolkits upon this question. So what are some ways that we can challenge ourselves to build our self-awareness of unconscious bias we might have? So how can we challenge ourselves to figure out what are those biases, you know, besides using like the implicit bias test or anything else?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I have a myriad of resources. First, I would say, think about the questions that we're asking ourselves. So when we ask ourselves, is this person, you know, criminal? Maybe, you know, asking ourselves, what are the unmet needs that this person has? So those are kind of pillars of increasing that EQ, that emotional intelligence piece. I think that increasing our cultural intelligence too is super important. And there is a ton of research on IQ, EQ, and CQ out there. So cultural intelligence, you know, getting out and learning more about different cultures. So making yourself versed in, you know, there are so many different makeups and populations in Ohio. Ohio has the second largest Somali population in the nation, in Columbus. So, you know, really making an effort to get outside of your comfort zone, I think is where you're going to break a lot of those implicit messages down and, you know, be able to get to know communities. There is a specific resource that I wanted to point to. It's also from the Kirwan Institute. It is called, it's a guide about equitable civic engagement. And it has different pillars about, you know, increasing your EQ and your CQ, not judging people for diversity, but being able to find the gifts in diversity. A lot of the times we look at things like, oh, this is such an inconvenience, but if a community is small, that might actually work out, you know, in your favor when we're serving folks. So not judging people from, you know, the messages that we learned when we were 5, 6, 7 years old, but really taking the time to get to know cultures because they are beautiful. So many different cultures are just so amazing, and it will make you a better person. It'll make you able to show up for everyone when we're doing that. So that Kirwan Institute equitable civic engagement piece, definitely thinking about the questions that we're asking ourselves for sure, and working to, yeah, increase that EQ and CQ, I think, you know, and we'll do that through those activities that I mentioned. All of those are going to help with raising your EQ and your CQ. And the last thing I'll say before I take a breath is that Harvard Business actually published a document saying, like, we are currently screening folks based on IQ, but our strongest leaders are going to be high in EQ and CQ as well.
Thank you for that. And so I want to add one of the comments. The IAT test, I took that also and was taken back by my results. I believe it has a lot to do with how programmed or brainwashed even we are from all the negativity that has been in our upbringing, seeing the news, TV shows, firsthand eyewitness, etc. No matter if we agree or not, it is our unconscious views. That's a very excellent point. You want to add to that, Olivia?
I do. I just want to say thank you for, you know, being vulnerable with that, because I took it too, and it said that I had an implicit bias towards people of color. And I was like, how? I do this for a living. Like, you know, I was literally appalled. And, you know, it makes me, it just is important to remember that no matter how good the work is that we're doing, we are still functioning under a system that, you know, has a dominant culture here and a minority culture there. So it takes a lot of intention to undo a lot of the messages that we received, and just to remember that, like, especially in the age and time of social media, we are receiving thousands of messages a day. We've received hundreds since we started, you know, this talk with each other. So it is a constant, it's a constant practice. And I appreciate that, because yeah, I had the same experience.
Awesome, thank you. we're gonna go into our next question. And again, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box and I'll get to it. If you don't feel comfortable writing it to the whole group, you can write it privately to me under the name of StarkMHAR, and I'll be able to read your question anonymously. So for our next question, I'm going to pass it on to Ramel Moore. So Ramel, here is your question. Who are the well-intended and intentioned? How do they differ from others that you or I might meet? And since I am well-intentioned, how do I convey that in my work with others who lack the privilege I have? Sorry, there's like a three-part question here, but I'm going to pass it to Ms. Ramel Moore.
Thank you, Isaac. And I want to also thank Olivia for her presentation. It was excellent. It was so well informed and so comprehensive. It's kind of hard to talk behind that, but I'm going to attempt to do something today. First, I have a question, and I don't want you to really answer it aloud, but just think about what you would do. Just be honest and think about it. So my question is, have you ever had to approach two African American men that you did not know and you weren't going to interact with? Suppose you were passing them on a stairwell or passing them on a street. You're just trying to pass by them. What do you do? What do you think? And I'm going to get back to this at the end of my little comments. But that's a question that I think we all need to think about. I want to tell you something about myself and how I got into diversity. First of all, I've lived in a couple of African countries. And when I came back from Liberia, when they had started this civil war, I ended up at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. And I ended up being the vice president for student affairs. And during my first year there was a problem between Black students and white students. This at the time was an all-girls college. And so the Black students were ready to, box. And the white students would come to me privately to say, hey, Dean, what do we do about these Black students? They're so anti-anybody. They sit by themselves. And they're primarily talking about the lunchroom dynamics. And some of you who might be at universities might know or have, or as you were in school, observed that happening. So I was interested in and resolved to do something about it with our new entering freshman class. And so I looked for people who could come to speak to our new students and current students about racial dynamics. And at the time, and this was before they talked about unconscious bias, which came out in 1995. This was in 1992, and actually, the person I'm getting ready to say something about, he and a friend of or a colleague of his began writing about it in 1986. So Dr. DeVideo had written an article with, and I don't even know if I'm going to say his name right, his name is Dr. Gettner, and they had developed a theory called aversive racism. And aversive racism is when you are, consider yourself to be non-racist, I'll say it like that. So his presentation was on prejudice among the well-intentioned, and that was one of the best presentations I've ever had the opportunity to see. He's a white man, so I want to make that clear up front. And he talked about going to the library and walking and looking for a particular resource. And it just so happened that he saw a Black guy, and I don't know whether it was a student or a professor, but doesn't matter. He saw a Black guy in one of the stack areas, which is the area where the books are. and he decided to change and not go that direction. He decided to go home, as a matter of fact. But because he's a good guy and he figures that he is not a racist, he thought about it. Why did I avoid this guy? What was behind that? And out of that came his presentation of prejudice among the well-intentioned. And he talked about being a good-intentioned person, but having racist acts. So he did a couple of things when he thought about this. He talked to his colleague. He acknowledged that something about him made him take the action. Nobody else had done this to him. He did it to himself. So he became consciously aware, which is very important. And he also confronted it. He evaluated his actions. He consulted a trusted colleague, and he committed to take action to change his behavior. And I could say more, but I know that our time is running out. But I just want to say some of the things that he did mention were that you can, as an individual, abide by and hold high the principles of equality and view yourself as non-prejudiced, but still possess conflicting and often non-conscious negative conflicts and beliefs about Blacks or other minorities. And this term, the term for this is called aversive racism. And that's people who react by avoiding or by becoming anxious or fearful when they have to encounter Black people or people who are different from themselves. In my personal professional life, I have experienced both blatant and aversive racism, but there's a third category that I want to talk about. And I think that we should all aspire towards, and that is being anti-racist. We can all do this. Yes, we can, because all people of color including Blacks, can be racist. Everybody has that capacity to be racist. It doesn't always have to do with privilege. It has to do with difference. So becoming an anti-racist is a goal we could all aim for. None of us are just one thing. And you mentioned it, Olivia, about intersectionality. And so none of us are, we're layers of things based on the way we grew up, and then also experiences that we've had as adults. Oppressed people are also capable of being racist or sexist or an ableist, an ageist, a heterosexist, anti-Semitic, or a classist. So all of those things are possible. I just want to say Kimberly Crenshaw came up with intersectionality. And Ibram X. Kendi wrote a wonderful book last year. It was published that is called How to Be an Anti-Racist. So when I started, I asked you to think about two African American males walking down the street, and just think again to yourself, what did they look like? Were they youth with a basketball? Were they thugs with snarls and knives? Or were they two Black guys in business suits? Reflect honestly on your own thoughts. Thank you, Isaac.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. And if you have anything else you need to add, we'll still have some extra minutes moving forward. So don't let those points go if you feel like the message needs to be spoken.
Okay. Because I could talk more about.
Yeah, no, do you want to add? You can add, if you have a couple more minutes, if you want to add something.
Well, I can talk a little bit more about that presentation, because for me, it was life altering, and for some other people, it may have some similar impact. the main thing that he was not, he said, I am not prejudiced. I am not a racist. But to me, the main point about that was that he wanted to distinguish himself from the blatant racists, and we kind of know who those people are, and the well-meaning poor persons like himself, who also may be victims of racism, but they support the victims of racism, and they sympathize with people who have had racist attitudes or policies directed toward them. But they feel like they are torn between what they value and believe, but then their automatic responses. And that is, like Olivia said, based on how they were brought up. This is what was happening. You remember I was telling you about the Black women on our campus at Hood College, and this was what was happening to them. They were being perceived in one way, and so in another way, they reacted to the racism that they were receiving. They were trying to be also to come together as the in-group, out-group kind of reaction. So they formed a tight-knit group, although they might have had troubles between themselves within the group. No one on the outside of the group was able to penetrate that. And sometimes that's how we feel in the larger society when we talk about how Black people behave one way, and there may be Black people within that group who do not necessarily agree with some of the actions, but will feel compelled to be positive about what is socially happening. Okay. Thank you, Isaac.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Morel. I am going to pass it on to Olivia real quickly because I believe she wanted to add something. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ms. Moore. That was great. I just wanted to touch on a couple of points about that racism within minority groups. So that is a deeper level race theory that we can talk about with, colorism, intersectionality, anti-Blackness within other minority groups. But we know that oppression is prejudice and power. So I just want to keep that at the top of people's minds. We all can have those prejudiced thoughts, but who has the power to make decisions about people's lives? Those are different based on the dominant culture, like the closer proximity you have to whiteness, essentially. And the last thing is, you mentioned anti-racism, and this book is Anti-Racist. And it has a lot of really cool activities that you can do, a lot of self-awareness activities that you can do. She's not paying me to suggest this book, but it's actually really cool. So that there are also a lot of really cool activities you can do with your organization if that's the way that y'all want to go to. And I'll be quiet. Thanks, Ms. Moore. That was great.
I'm not sure if Ms. Ramon Moore wants to add anything to that before I read some comments.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, all right. So one comment that I want to read is, a large issue is that none of us exist in one societal environment. We have multi-social work, home, and in different roles in each. Our biases are formed and reinforced. And then there is another comment too. I like to read this. I am an art therapist for a cancer center, and I have been doing art therapy virtually since March with patients. I type a weekly art therapy newsletter that has a part on it called Artist Corner. I pick an artist to introduce to the patients and give them bios and YouTube videos to watch. I pick male and female artists from Britain, Italy, Russia, China, Mexico, etc. Then I realized that most of the artists had light skin. I started a search to find Black artists to share with the patients. I had a much harder time finding male Black artists online. I have found some recently and are now posting them. I also had a Black male who wanted some YouTube videos on drawing portraits. I asked him what he was drawing portraits of. He stated self-portraits. I made a point to email him videos of artists drawing portraits of Black males. I think what is important is just trying to take a step back to observe yourself, to notice what you may be missing. That is a very, very excellent point. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. Very, very good.
May I say something before you go on,
Sure.
Isaac? This morning, and I don't know how many of you watched CBS, but I was watching the news, and there's a guy named Christian Cooper, and his name may sound familiar to some of you. If you recall, he was in New York taking pictures of birds, and there was a white woman who was walking her dog, and there's no problem with that. But the problem arose because she wanted to call the police on him because she said she was being disturbed by his sitting there watching birds, and him asking her to take her dog away because dogs were not allowed, and there was a clear sign pointing that out in I think it was Central Park in New York City. That is an example of when we think about racism, that's an example of the blatant racism. But she may not have been a blatant racist before walking to and encountering this man, but she wanted to use her white privilege in order to have her way. And I just saw that this morning, and I just thought it was a good thing to have people reflect on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are going to pass our next question to Brandis. So, Brandis, what advice do you have for the audience about being aware on ways of communicating with the LGBTQ+ community?
Thanks, Isaac. Holy cow, after, thank you, Ms. Ramel and Olivia. It's really hard to find something like new and, you know, compelling to add to all of that really amazing guidance and insight and resources. And I think for me, when addressing how to think about bias, implicit bias, and working with the LGBTQ community, I think the area I'm most passionate about and tends to be more part of a conversation, I guess, at times, for me and in general, is the trans and non-binary portion of that community. And I will just offer some of my thoughts about how to interact with that community. And a lot of it comes down to, and I think this is how I think about how to communicate in general, in ways that are hopefully intersectional, is, you know, how willing are you to be wrong and corrected? How willing are you to consider that what we've always done, or how we've always talked about, or how we've always understood people, how willing are you to allow that to change and for that to not cause you to fall apart in a way that a queer, non-binary, trans, gay, lesbian person would have to then take care of you in some way or educate you in some way. I think a lot about the LGBTQ community involves addressing, I mean, in an intersectional way, there's so much that's rooted in racism. There's so much that's rooted in patriarchy and how we see gender. And there's research that, you know, adapting your language to be more gender neutral, it's proven to reduce the prominence of the male narrative in the room. It's not just about a trans or non-binary person in engaging in gender neutral language, but it also prioritizes every gender and body in that room. I would say some of the things that have already been mentioned, an accountability partner, a lot of self-reflection. How much do you understand that alphabet? You know, how much do you know what all of those letters are? Do you know the further expansion, you know, what that plus leads into? Do you, I think when it comes to all of these areas of implicit bias, I find it useful for myself as a white person, as a straight passing person, as, you know, there are a lot of ways in which I find it helpful to be willing to be wrong and to be willing to develop some resilience around being wrong, being corrected, being asked to learn something new in a way that doesn't create stress or outright harm to the person I'm needing to understand differently. And when I experience someone else doing that on my behalf, as someone who's come out with different pronouns and further expanding my LGBTQ identity, it has meant a lot to me. And I work with a lot of queer and trans and non-binary clients. It has meant a lot to them as well. The people who have just been willing to say, like, I didn't know that, thank you for letting me know, correcting without apologizing to a degree that causes the person who's been harmed to have to take care of the person apologizing. Learning how to speak to and about someone is really important when it comes to the LGBTQ community. And if you don't know how to speak to or about someone, being willing to ask, being willing to take whatever the answer is. You know, if you see my pronouns, they, them, you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them in this capacity as, you know, panelist. You know, but if you meet me somewhere and I say my pronouns are they, them, do your best with that and then go figure that out. There's a ton of information. There's a ton of education available to you. There's a really fun comic book that, you know, I'm a therapist and my clients don't come in the door always understanding how to talk about me or to me as a non-binary person. I have a really cool little comic book I tend to hand out to new clients. I'll put a link to that in the chat. There are easy ways to get up to speed and to also remember that if you're a cis hetero or if you don't share some of these identities, it's really useful to just be willing to never be the expert, to never assume that you have officially become an ally, that you have officially become an expert on an experience that isn't yours, or that because you have done extensive training on it, extensive training on language or how to frame things, that can change as people change and as these conversations change. And the LGBTQ community is always changing. There is always new language. There is, just a few years ago, we were saying, we were talking about asking people about their preferred pronouns. Now we understand that to be somewhat harmful in that our pronouns are not preferred. They're a label that indicates our gender and our identity and who we are. They're not preferred, they simply are. And so being willing to constantly keep a finger on that pulse of any identity really, but especially, you know, in my case, it would be the queer community of what's changed. You know, I think it was Ms. Ramal who talked about, someone talked about who's quiet in the room. You know, if you don't have a lot of LGBTQ people in your circle, or if you're a clinician who doesn't see a lot of LGBTQ clients, is that because they don't exist? I mean, one of these population-focused learning series trainings there was someone who talked about the fact that Stark County has a higher LGBTQ population than Summit County, and yet there's a lot more visibility, it seems like, externally in the Summit County community. And that has to do with how openly and visibly affirming you are to that community. And that involves things like using gender neutral language to prioritize everyone in the room rather than the implicit bias there is generally patriarchal. Leading with your own pronouns. I do, especially as a non-binary person who uses, not historically typical pronouns that cause people to have to learn to adapt their language. I wear them, I label myself with them. I try to do everything I possibly can to ensure that I'm not misgendered. And it's incredibly affirming when someone who is cisgendered brings that to the table themselves. You don't have to wait for a person to identify themselves a certain way to include the possibility that you're in a room with someone who does need their pronouns clarified or pronouns stated, or who might feel safer and more willing to engage in whatever activity, training, therapy session. Is that a question on your intake forms? Is it a question? It would be a great question when you're registering for these kind of things, like to have it be a part of just a normalized part of the conversation. Relationship expansive language, also not assuming who someone's partner is. And doing all of this, I guess, just to really make it clear why it's important. Learning how to speak about someone accurately, learning how to speak to someone in an affirming way, treat them affirmingly, how to include every person in your language, in your forms, in how you describe things. Women's wellness visits, those are person wellness visits. Not everybody with a certain type of body identifies as a woman. And so are you an office that, when you think about a women's group and a men's group at a clinical practice, where are your non-binary folks supposed to go? All of those things, simple things like pronoun use and getting a name right, and fixing it quickly, it reduces suicide risk. It reduces mental health factors that a lot of you who are here for this training, like, your goal is to reduce negative health impacts, mental health impacts, and just learning how to speak to someone and becoming comfortable with speaking about them and to them, and including the ability to be wrong or corrected in that is crucial to a person's mental health and their own resilience and their success and their continued livelihood. Trans people are incredibly high rate of suicide, and some of it has to do with the simple struggle of finding ways to be referred to as who they are and accurately. So I'm sorry, I think I went very rambly, but hopefully that answers the question, and probably then some.
That does. I'm going to read the comment that Olivia mentioned. The suicide rate for LGBTQ youth speaks to the responsibility that we have to be equitable. So thank you, Brandis. I think this is great. I do have a follow-up, I guess, for something that we were previously talking about, and then we'll pass it on to Christina to give her an opportunity to talk. But for example, this is also an anonymous question. So one thing that I have always found offensive is the N-word. It bothers me so much, and I don't understand when the Black community uses it in a conversation with each other. My children have friends from all backgrounds and culture. My son is white and his best friend is Black. My son's friends and his brothers were calling each other apes in a derogatory way, and I asked them to stop it because it was offensive. I find it odd that the N-word offends me, yet my son's Black friends and his brothers were laughing and were not bothered by it. Can someone help me understand this? I'm going to pass that to Olivia and Ms. Ramel Moore to talk about that.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I saw a really cool video kind of explaining this, because I have ways to think through things in my mind, but I have to realize that not everyone is at the same base level as me, right? So there is there has been such a deep history of violence that has come from, you know, the N-word, and just like in the LGBT community, there are certain words and there are certain terms that specific group has chosen to reclaim as a way to take that narrative and shift that narrative to heal and for reparations for our people. And so I know that it can be uncomfortable as someone that doesn't identify in that group, to watch that group have those dynamics that you don't understand necessarily. But that is, and there is a lot of literature about the reclaiming. And I will say also, it's a generational thing. My dad is from Alabama, Georgiana, Alabama. You probably couldn't find it on a map. And he is very uncomfortable with that word, because growing up, you know, that automatically meant danger. So there's a lot of like, not only social outcomes that we're seeing, but there are DNA outcomes that we can measure that, you know, are affecting the way that, you know, people respond to specific language. And I will say, I'll speak for, and I won't speak for all millennials, but I'm a millennial, and oftentimes it is used to reclaim violence that has been used against the community. And lastly, I will say it could also be, I don't know how old your son is, but it could also be a lack of education that they've received around their history and their culture and what that means. And that's not a reflection on the children, it's a reflection on the way that our education system is set up. So I feel rambly too, and I'm going to take a breath.
Thanks, Olivia. If I can add, there is a historical background to nigger, and all these other kind of words. One must remember that when people from Africa came to the United States, they came in ships. But not only did they come in ships, even before they left the continent, many were stripped of their ethnic and tribal affiliation. I'm going to say tribal because I've lived in Africa for 15 years. So I know that they do have tribes, but I know that they also do not like other people saying that because of what that translates to people. But so there have been many, many different things that people have been called, including colored, including Black, including Afro-American, which I try to correct every time I hear it because Afro is a hairstyle. And to today being called African-American, so they can have a connection to a place, the continent, as well as to this place where they are born. African-Americans as a people are very unique. They were made in America. No other place will you find an African-American except here, unless they moved to some other place. So while they have done that, there has been all of these evolutions, just like the LGBTQ and I think IA community has evolved over this rather short time. In the past 400 years, the language relating to Black people and their identity has changed. And I loved what Olivia said about her generation, which my youngest son is also a member of the millennial generation, because they are reclaiming it and using it in a way that they do not think it is pejorative. However, there are some that still misuse it, and there are others outside of the group. Remember, we have in-group and out-group. We have others outside of the group that still use it in a negative way. And so we just need to be careful of that. Thank you.
I'm going to pass it on real quickly to Brandis to mention one thing, and then we're going to give an opportunity to Christina to share. So,
sorry, I was
that's
muted.
okay.
Yeah, I wanted to say in regard to the LGBTQ plus community too, as well, like words like, so I use the word queer several times as a queer identifying person, but also there's some mindfulness to be had around that, because that can also be generational. There are older members of the LGBTQ community who do not like that word. There are some other words that in that same way, there's some reclaiming there. And I would just, I'm using it from a place within the community, but I would always, I think Olivia talked about kind of mirroring, I think Ms. Rommel did as well, but just kind of mirroring how someone wants to be spoken about, before if you have an LGBTQ plus client, good to kind of listen for how they speak about themselves. And this isn't so much in regard to slurs, but just in terms of the terminology that's okay to use with them. That can be really important. So queer is one of those words. I just wanted to clarify that as well.
So thank you, Brandis. All right, so we're gonna pass on now to Christina. And again, I know there's some other comments in there, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And so I'm going to give this moment now to Christina. So Christina, when working with the Latino, Latina, Latinx, and Maya community, what are some examples of unconscious bias that may occur?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And as Brandy said, Olivia and Ramel make, three of them, they did a very good job. But as I said in the beginning, sometimes since we belong to the Hispanic community, everyone thinking about that we came from just for one country, and we have people from Mexico, from South America, from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic, and everyone they thinking about that we just belong to one community, and we have a lot of community around that. The other thing is one of the things that I see before is they ask question like, why you don't know how to write if you are very old? Why you don't know how to speak Spanish? Or why do you know how to speak English if you live here in the United States? We have one case. My kids and I, when we moved to the United States, we were in Walmart, and we saw one man. He just finished working, and he just speaks Spanish. And one man approached him and said, why you don't speak English? Why you are very dirty if we are here buying our grocery? And he tried to explain to him, I just finished my job. I don't have time to go to take a shower because I have just arrived from my job to here and then from my home. And he said, if you are here, you need to speak English. You don't need to speak Spanish. And I approached him and I said, I'm sorry. But he said that he just finished his job and he don't know how to speak English, but he's here because he has all of his grocery. He needs to buy all of his grocery over here. And still, this person bothered him. And I saw him, he was crying outside of Walmart. And he said, I moved here because I have the needs. I moved here because in my country, we don't have any job. And I moved here because they give me one visa to work as seasonal worker. But why they don't understand me? And right now, 20 years after it happened, this happens right now with the kids. I have here one teenager that he is the second generation. He was in the high school level, and someone said to him, you don't need to be here. You need to move to Mexico because you are not belong to this country. And these words make that kid to have a lot of bad experience. He was depressed, and mom and dad, they born here, they grew up here. he is the third generation of that family, and he has a very good grades. But he said, if I am a US citizen, why they ask me that I need to move to Mexico? I'm just speaking English. I don't know how to speak another language. I don't know how to, I'm going to survive. But this is something, the bias that we have more and more in our community. The other case that I have is everyone thinking that the Hispanic community, they speak Spanish, just Spanish. And no, in the Mayan community and in Mexico, we still have, in Mexico, we have 62 different native language that they speak over there. In the Mayan community, they have, I think, from 35 to 40 or something like that. And sometimes the doctors, they ask me, Cristina, would you please help me to make this translation? And I drive over there. When I saw them is, no, I'm not the speak Quiche, sorry. We need to find someone that speaks Quiche. And this is one of the questions that my suggestion for all of you is, do you speak Spanish? What language you are preferred to have the translator? And the other stuff is, when you belong to and Isaac, that he is from Puerto Rico, and he's always said that Puerto Rico and Republican Dominican, he has different accent than me, and their words, they are not the same. It's like here, when I live in Kansas, they said, oh, I came from this part of United States, and this is why I have an accent. This is the kind of stuff that happened with my community, the community that I serve. A few words that we used, the person that make the translation, if they don't use it, it's a confusion for them. Why? Because sometimes, like, one of the words that they use in Puerto Rico is jeva. When I listen that word is, what does it mean? And I just was very confusing. And this is for Mexico is mi novia, and it's my girlfriend or my boyfriend. Different kind of words change all of the sentence in our community too. And this is why, as everyone said, it's important to ask, do you speak Spanish or you speak another language? I still have problems with my accent, because sometimes when I ask for some food, they said, oh, what did you say? Oh, is this? No. It's like if I'm going to McDonald's and I said, I want nuggets. What? And we have this kind of problem sometimes because our accent. And in the when I start to help the Mayan community, since I am from Mexico, a few of them, they're very conscious about me until they know me. And one day they said, because I was thinking about that the Mexican, they don't like Guatemalan. And this happened with us too. We have this conscious bias without say it, but we have in our thinking until we are going to ask that person. And we have the same problem that Ramel, Bendis, it's the best approach for us is, what do you prefer? Spanish, your native language, or if I want to respect you, tell me, how can I set words to you too? Because it's very difficult. Sometimes you're thinking about that they belong to Mexico and they are from Honduras. You're thinking about that they just they are just a newcomer and they're born here and they are the fifth, sixth generation in the Hispanic community. And I have more and more kids that they have a lot of depression because of this situation right now. We have more and more I don't find exactly the term, like aggression sometimes with the teens, because they said to them, why you are here? You need to move to your country. While you are just one space for our white family to work, if you are taking our job and you don't have more opportunities. I explained to, I have one of my friends that she visited Florida, and she said that she went to buy in one jewelry store, and she just decided to pick the jewelry before she's going to do some other shopping. And she said that one police officer was close to her, the one that they take care of the mall, and one of the girls that they serve over there, or they help over there, she said, she asked her why does she's looking around, why she's, if she has money, enough money to pay for that jewelry because it was very expensive. And she said, on that day, I feel very bad. And I said to her, I want to talk to your supervisor. And she said, I'm the supervisor, okay? I want to talk to this person. And she said, what person? And it's the person that told her that she needs to pick one jewelry. And she said, no, I'm the person that you need to talk to. And then when she figured out that the man that she's working with is the one that asked her to pick the jewelry, she was surprised. And she said, this is something that you need to learn. You need to respect the person because you don't know exactly if that person has money or doesn't have money. If I am there, it's because probably I want to see, but if someone did something wrong to you, I'm not going to do it. Just this is something that you need to learn. And she said, I feel very bad. And I can say to the men, because I'm usually buying in that store, you can fire her, but no, I want her to learn that she needs to respect that everyone that is going to be over there has money or doesn't have money. She needs to respect the human being. And this is something that we have more and more here right now with our community. And sometimes it's because, I don't know if you see a few of the women from Guatemala, they use their clothes and they are very beautiful. And a few of them said, when they saw me, they said, oh, a few women, they said, oh, your clothes, they are beautiful. But a few of them, they're just looking at us like we don't have any value. And this is something that is not good. We need to respect each other. We are in this world to love and respect our community. And sometimes just one word can change the life of some person.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina, for that. I appreciate your input. We have 2 minutes left, and actually a minute left, so we're gonna go into our closing. But I did wanted to add something that actually happened to me personally as an unconscious bias I just remembered. And so I'm calling myself out. I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, married to my husband, and I had to do something to my car. And so the place that I went to, I felt very uncomfortable in that location. And I wasn't sure if they were LGBTQ plus friendly, so I didn't mention a lot, but the guy was asking a lot of questions to me, and then figured out that I was gay, and even pointed it out, and then assumed and automatically told me, so I guess your husband bought you that car. And for me, it just, I can't tell you the feeling that I felt in that moment and how like heart cringing it was, because I felt unsafe in that location. I didn't know if they were going to do a disservice because they were still fixing something on the car, and it just took me aback, and that literally just happened in July. The fact that that person actually said that comment was super offensive, thinking that because I was Latino and gay, that, you know, I'm married to someone who is probably white in his mindset, and that therefore that person bought that vehicle for me. And so that was just, it was a super huge offense, but something that really does happen, and still today till 2020. So we're going to go into our closing. And so I would like to first thank our speaker, Olivia Montgomery, for bringing in such an amazing presentation, and all our panelists for sharing their stories with us. Thanks to everyone for coming to our Population Focused Learning Series. I hope this event has brought some awareness of unconscious bias. Your input is important to us. Please fill out your survey and email them to Lisa Jordan, whose email is on the survey. Please look at our StarkMHAR website for more information about any future StarkMHAR trainings. And thank you all again for being here, and enjoy the upcoming fall. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thank you so much. And we'll try to make sure we'll get that resource list sent out to everyone. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for our panelists and speakers. So if you want to say goodbye, say goodbye.